Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodian of the land we meet today and pay my respect to their elder, past, and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Then I pay my special respect to all the fallen heroes from Spring Revolution in Myanmar. I also thank this month's AMI presenter, Dr. Tong Shui and Dr. Michael Brain. I appreciate all our participants from different parts of the world for joining the AMI seminar today. Our AMI president, Nicholas Goppel, will open the meeting. Nicholas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, May, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. It's a particularly interesting topic, I think. We have, since the coup, the military regime has always talked about annihilating all the opposition to it, particularly the ethnic armed organizations. And the ethnic armed groups and the National Unity Government, for their part, have always rejected any suggestion of a dialogue with the military in terms of finding a negotiated outcome, talking much more about needing to change the system completely. And indeed, proposals coming from ASEAN, for example, to facilitate a peaceful dialogue have been roundly rejected by both the military and the NUG and the ethnic armed groups. And yet, on the third anniversary of the coup, the NUG and three of the resistance groups, the Chin National Front, the Karen National Union, and the Karenni National Progressive Party, issued a joint position statement, which, amongst other things, had an action plan, and part of it was negotiations with, and I read it, the responsible leadership of the Myanmar military. And this is the first time in a written document, certainly that I have seen, where any even suggestion of negotiations with the military has been mentioned. So I thought it'd be useful if we would have no other than the NUG's representative in Australia, Tunang Shui, to talk to us about this, and Dr. Michael Breen from Melbourne University, who has written a lot about federalism and studied it also, to unpack what this might mean and what's behind it. Is it indeed a fundamental shift in the direction of things in Myanmar? So with that brief setting of the context, I would like to invite Tunang Shui to begin, and I think he's well known to our audience, so I won't spend a lengthy period introducing him, other than to mention, of course, that as the NUG's representative in Australia, is an authoritative voice and comes from an academic background. Dr. Tunang Shui, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, President Gopo, for giving me this great opportunity. So I have to share a single slide for my presentation. Please let me share with you. At the same time, please let me begin with acknowledging the country. So I do acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land we are gathering. And also I do pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging. So thank you so much for introducing me, and as well as the NUG precondition for the negotiated talk with the Myanmar military junta. So please let me begin with the NUG, NUCC, and EROs, their vision on the related to the Myanmar Spring Revolution. The vision is to build the peaceful federal democratic union, which guarantees freedom, justice, and equality. That is present in the Federal Democratic Charter. So this NUG and EROs, everybody on the same page to build this outcome. And then before I'm touching on the NUG position on EROs, and as well as the Myanmar military junta, that position is significantly related to the past experience and also the lesson learned by NUG leaders and then EROs. So please let me touch base the past. So current over 70 years long protracted conflict is significantly associated with the colonial legacy, multi-ethnicity, historical, social formation, and also unmet cultural, political, economic, and security needs. That began since the Burmese monarchy and all the way along colonial period, Second World War, and then that unmet need is more significant during the Civil War, over 70 years long Civil War. And then Myanmar fall under militarized politics since 1957, and the exploitative economy and the incapacitated or illegitimate governance. So these situations are lesson learned from today's leaders who are leading the Myanmar Spring Revolution. These are the basic facts and important things for NUG position and NUG relationship with EROs. So the leaders today, they already learn from the experience. When they look at the Myanmar military, they see rapid coups. Myanmar military is a primary agent of the conflict in Myanmar. Myanmar military has no intention to real peace, positive peace, and also installing the Burmanization. On the other hand, along the 70 years long Civil War, there was an accumulation of traumatic experiences, distrust, grievances, hate, and stereotyping. So that determined today vision and then the determination of the Myanmar Spring Revolution. So NUG, the first minister, U Yimo, he posted on his Facebook account in January that he met almost all ethnic organization leaders in person as well as on virtual meeting. And then each and every leaders, they all are on the same page to eliminate the Myanmar military dictatorship because of this lesson learned and experience in the past. Without elimination of the military dictatorship, they don't think so they are able to build the peaceful federal democratic union. That is why, as mentioned by the President Kobo, no one noticed the negotiated dialogue with Myanmar military in the early days of Myanmar Spring Revolution. And also the leaders, they all are agree to find a way to resolve the structural issue, federalism, demarcation of the federal units, resource sharing, ethnic rights, and minority rights, these are things. And also, in the same time, you can see Myanmar Spring Revolution landscape. The leaders are trying to meet cultural, political, economic, and security needs. So if you look at the Myanmar Spring Revolution political roadmaps in the Federal Democracy Charter Part 1, the roadmap step 1 to 8 clearly highlight the elimination of the Myanmar military dictatorship. And then NUG and EROs, allied EROs, they set up the joint military commands, and we have witnessed the coordinated attack since last quarter of the 2023. And also to resolve the structural issue, the first step they did is abolish the 2008 constitution and clearly highlighted in the joint political statement that they will not allow any attempt to reinstate the 2008 constitution, including the general election to be held under the 2008. And then the Federal Democracy Charter Part 1, they clearly highlighted about the federal principles. This outcome never achieved in the past peace conferences. And then in the political roadmap, step 9 to 11 clearly highlighted about how to resolve the structural issue when the NUG and EROs win over the Myanmar military. And then recently released statement, released on the 31st of January 2024, that statements clearly highlight and reaffirm the political roadmap step 9 to 11 with detailed plan of action. And then to meet the cultural, political, and economic and security needs, you can see EROs and NUG, they are trying their best to transform the institutions, including administrative institutions, intelligence institutions, health, and education. So the leaders, they formulated the federal health policy, federal education policy. Now the NUG leaders, they established central committee to implement interim local administrative mechanism. So these are the things they are trying to meet cultural, political, economic, and security needs of the people in Myanmar. Regarding the Myanmar military, all the leaders agreed to total security sector reform. And then they all agree that in future, the military must be under democratically elected civilian governments. And final steps, once they fulfill all these actions, there will be a final step, that is political roadmap step number 12. So according to the approved new constitution by referendum, the transitional national unity government will hold the general election to build the peaceful federal democratic union. So that is why the statement released on the 31st of January, you can see the NUG and LIERO's political position and also precondition to talk with responsible military leaders, and also the action plans with details to go through the political roadmaps from the step 7, 8 until the 12. Yeah, so this is my presentation, and I'm more than happy to answer your question when the Q&A session comes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yeah.
Well, may I invite now Dr. Michael Breen from Melbourne University's to give his assessment of the joint statement and indeed, sorry, the joint position statement, and invite him to make his remarks. Michael?
Thank you, Nicholas, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today and also to share the stage with Dr. Tun Aung Shroy, which is an honor. Normally, I have slides to show, but today is a once-off where I haven't actually got any slides, and I am the odd one out for a change. So I'll talk for a while, and as Nicholas said, I'll give some of my perspectives on it. When I was initially asked if I could speak on this, I was not sure I would have enough to contribute, but I had another look and thought about it some more, and I've decided I'm quite happy to share my views on that. But I want to emphasize that I think there's probably some people in the audience who have a much more insight into this statement and what's behind it. So it'd be great to have some of that come out during the discussion stage as well. And there was much optimism at the time.
Michael, you are frozen. Michael, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you are frozen. Your connection is very weak from here as far as I can see.
Okay. There's not much I can do, sorry.
Sorry.
If you can hear me, I'll just press on, and if I freeze occasionally, hopefully I'm in a good-looking stage at that point. So in 2020, I presented on the election, and the picture was not quite so positive at that time. And the next time I presented was in the midst of a post-coup environment, and there was at the time no apparent pathway out. People could ask what might happen next. I would have no idea. So today I feel that there is a shift, and a key part of this is the joint position statement, There's obviously a long way to go still, but I do feel the tide may be turning. We've seen the successes of the 1027 operation that resulted in significant territorial gains for EROs and also led to a ceasefire brokered by China. Most recently, we've had the implementation or commencing the implementation of the conscription law by the Tatmadaw, and this just frankly stinks of desperation and delusion. And it looks like an act that is more likely to bolster the numbers of PDFs and members in EROs, increase the distrust, corruption, and dysfunction, and the number of Tatmadaw deserters. So ultimately, you'd think that that process will backfire. And then, of course, there is the joint position statement, the subject of today's discussion. So it was released by the NUG and 3 allied EROs, as we have heard, on the 31st of January, and it has 6 objectives, which have been more or less mentioned, but I'll just go through them briefly. To overturn the usurpation of state power by the military, to eliminate the military, as Dr. Tunang Shui put, to terminate the involvement of the armed forces in politics and ensure that all armed forces operate solely under the command of a civilian government elected through democratic processes, to abrogate the 2008 constitution in its entirety, to draft a new constitution that embodies federalism, democratic values, and a commitment to transitional justice. So they're all very, very important points in their own right. And Dr. Tun has mentioned some of the reasons that this is significant. And he's also really emphasized, I think, the pathway or the road towards this statement. And it has been entirely consistent with a lot of the actions and the federalism, the charter that was released a couple of years ago. So I would emphasize a couple of points. One is that it explicitly recognizes the 2020 election as a mandate for revolutionary change, and at the same time rejects the legitimacy of the 2008 election. So this, I think, is perhaps the first time those two things have been explicitly stated and acknowledged that that's essentially a contradiction, because the 2020 election was held under the provisions of the 2008 Constitution. But it is a fair interpretation. And, from my own conversations, many voters would see the elections as making a distinction as voting for local representatives at state and region levels, and then voting for the NLD at the central level to pursue system change. So that's consistent with, what people have been saying. And I'll read an excerpt. The outcome of the 2020 election should not be construed as an endorsement of the political framework outlined in the 2008 Constitution, but as a mandate for revolutionary change and the establishment of a new political system. And then, as mentioned, there's the action plans that are also included in the statement. They are continued political and military pressure against the junta, possible negotiations with the responsible leadership of the military to terminate military rule, as Nicholas has mentioned, the establishment of a transitional national unity government for a federal level, and the enactment of a transitional federal democratic constitution. So this is another key element of the statement, its assertion of federalism and federal principles, as has been emphasized by the Honourable Dr. Tunang Shui. And attendees who have seen me speak before, and Nicholas mentioned, I've written a lot about federalism. I'm always talking about federalism, and perhaps it's a good change that I'm not focusing on federalism today. But it is a significant statement for federalism because it gives some clues about the type of federalism or the process for federalism that haven't been given before. We know that federalism and democracy is critical for long-standing democratic peace and prosperity in Myanmar, so it reiterates that. But it recognizes the ability of federal units to set up local governments freely. So it's saying effectively we'll have a two-tiered federal system with the local level subordinate to the state level. And to specify that the establishment and demarcation of new federal, state, and region level boundaries only through peaceful political discourse during the transition period. So an acknowledgement that the number and boundaries of states and regions might change or might need to change through the development of a new federal constitution, which again, as far as I'm aware, is the first time that's really been explicitly asserted by the NUG and its allies. So this would actually occur after the overthrow of the military as part of a nationwide political conference. But as has been said, I think the most significant part is the demonstration of a willingness to negotiate with the military, specifically the responsible elements of the military as specified in the peaceful plan. So to negotiate with them to terminate military rule and for peaceful transition of power subject to their unconditional acceptance of the 6 political objectives. And the 6 political objectives are those ones I read out earlier. So as a comparative political scientist, it was always a bit of a concern to me that the NUG and EROs and others would flat out refuse to negotiate with the military. So outside of a victory on the battlefield, a peace settlement, especially one that precedes a constitutional settlement, generally cannot leave out one part of the conflict. It's against most conflict resolution theories. It's one part of the state and society, least of all one that is big as the military. So you might have a situation where the leaders are gone, but the military will still remain as an institution, however transformed, but also as the individuals and the relationships that make it up, as well as their families. I think in the past, we have had inflated numbers of the Tatmadaw security forces, between 200,000 and 400,000. More recently, a great study by Andrew Self came up with an estimate of 70,000. But we can also consider the families and associates of militaries that would be equivalent in size to a large ethnic nationality. So generally speaking, sidelining one element of society is usually a recipe for a reignition of conflict further down the track. But I certainly understand why there might be a refusal to talk. The military and its leadership have proven it cannot be trusted. It's proven it does not have the best interests of Myanmar and its people at heart. It has demonstrated again and again a brutal and callous disregard for human rights. So why in the world would you enter into a negotiation with them? There's just no conditions for a negotiation. Even as an impartial observer who's removed from the impacts, it's too much to swallow, let alone when you're South Africa. And to an extent, the military has been accommodated in part as part of that democratic transition, although fundamentally they were removed from power and placed under a civilian government. So we had opportunities for amnesties in South Africa. We had a much smaller number of military seats for a period in Indonesia. We had an interesting case in Nepal where one side of the conflict was not included in the peace settlement, and that was the king. But by the time they negotiated that settlement, the king was more or less powerless, and the United Nations was establishing a mission to supervise weapons and to support the integration of the armed forces. So quite different conditions again. So in any case, these have transitioned to militaries that are answerable to a democratically elected civilian government, which is exactly what the joint statement is saying. And so here now we might see the seeds, or at least one of them, of why there are few EROs signing the joint statement. One of the questions leading into this was, why that number, and will more EROs join up to the statement? I wonder, we have long-standing demands for a federal army, and the view potentially of some actors that each state or region should retain or have responsibility and command for their own military force. May not be fully consistent with some of those wordings in the joint statement. I'd welcome other perspectives on that. In some of the interviews I've done, I remember distinctly a member of an armed group. They were asking me what I thought about a federal army idea. And I think this was in 2014. And I expressed some reservations, and he said, well, yes, but how else can we prevent another coup? So, it's really deeply ingrained, the reasons for having and needing a federal army. So the statement is important, but there are criticisms and potential problems. One is that only 3 EROs have signed the statement, and along with the NUG, of course. Notably, the statement doesn't include Kachin Independence Army, which is among the most powerful, and as I mentioned, has recently launched a series of offensive against the Tatmadaw. Doesn't include the militarily strong UWSA, so this is no surprise, I'm sure, and doesn't include the powerful groups in the Shan state. But this is not to say that the EROs do not support the statement, or at least do not share the same goals. And as has been spelled out earlier, some of the processes that went through consulting other EROs about those objectives, even if they didn't sign the statement. But the KIA, I think, is a curious absence. Apparently, there was one other EOA involved in the discussions, but they didn't sign the agreement. As far as I'm aware, the NUG has not said who that other organisation is. We can guess it was the KIA, but we don't know. But as I said, we can't assume that not signing equates to not supporting. I would expect that the KIA does support it. As to whether there would be new signatories, I wouldn't expect so, because the timing of the statement is linked to the anniversary of the failed coup. And so I think there might be further statements made, but not necessarily a joining of that statement. So that, for example, the NUCC released its own statement. It says, the NUCC and its member organisations express deep appreciation for the committee endeavours of the NUG, elected parliamentarians who opposed the junta, the defensive efforts by the PDFs, EROs, the remarkable civil resistance, the sacrifices made by CDMers, and so forth. But we don't know who in the NUCC has been involved in making the statement, nor who endorsed it. There's no signatories there. But the other problem is that there are a number of EOAs who are in some way have some kind of alignment, however weak, with the military still. I'm told the Newmont State Party has recently split into 2, one that continues an alignment or at least observes the ceasefire with the military, and the other has now joined with the Democratic Forces and the NUG. Based on recent information, there are no less than 13 EROs, or perhaps EAOs in this case, that are in some kind of talks with the military. And this could be compared to 3 EROs signing up to the joint statement. And just in the last week, it's reported that 7 of the 10 ethnic armed organisations that signed the 2015 nationwide ceasefire agreement have formed a new alliance to continue peace talks with the regime. So there's other things going on with other EROs that call into question the unity behind this statement, as well as just how significant in practice that opening up of the potential to talk to the military is. So we have seen positive signs, but still perhaps not quite the unity that we need to overthrow the current regime. And I should probably conclude here, but just to reiterate a few points, I think the statement really is significant because it abrogates the 2008 Constitution while at the same time accepting the 2020 election. It renews its commitment to federal democracy and gives some details about what it might look like and the process for its design. But most importantly, it opens the door to a negotiation with responsible elements of the military, which in itself opens a new pathway to democratic peace in Myanmar. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. There's a few questions which have come in, which I'll put to our speakers. The first one says that the vast majority of Karen, who the person who's put the question speaks to, are 100% committed to independence. And the question is, with this joint position statement, which is laudable, but distrust amongst these people seems absolute. And how will this bridge be crossed between the distrust and getting to negotiations? I think, Michael, you touched on it in your presentation, but perhaps Dr. Tunang Shui, you might have some comments on that.
Yes. So as I presented in my presentation, the distrust, stereotyping, and grievances, that's very much associated with the past history, Burmese monarch and the colonial time. But today, Myanmar Spring Revolution is really a bad situation for people of Myanmar, but that brings also a good opportunity for the people. That is understanding on the Burmese people and understanding on the military. Now people in Myanmar are getting clear that the Myanmar military is an institution that making the violence and committing the war crime. And the Burmese people are now fighting against the Myanmar military. And then after witnessing this sort of thing, the ethnic minority are getting clear between people and then the institution. So this is good thing in the really bad situation. So that is why social cohesion landscape in Myanmar, I always said that is now moving to right direction. And then people are sharing sympathy and empathy because Myanmar people are now suffering like ethnic minorities suffer in the 70 years ago along the Civil War. So there is another thing. And other social interactions are also important. For example, young people live in the plain central region of Myanmar. They are now working together with hand in hand with the ethnic arms organization. So most of the drone units are led by the young people who live in central Myanmar. So they are fighting together hand in hand against the Myanmar military. And also the ethnic arms organization, they are taking the commanding position at the 3 military regions in Myanmar. So in North region led by KIA, and then the middle region is led by Karenni, and also the southern regions led by KNU generals. They are leading the commanding position and fighting against the Myanmar military together with the PDF in Myanmar. And also another important thing is this statement. If you look at any political statement, you can see the logo of the participating agency and then the signature of the participating organization. I got a really good chance to look at the original document of these statements. It is nearly 15 pages. I got chance in January, but actual statement is only 2 pages in English and 3 pages in Burmese. It is just an abstract. And then the process of the developing this political joint statement took more than 1 year, Ethnic organization and NUG, they reviewed the statement words by words, line by line, paragraph by paragraph. And then finally, they decided to release on the 31st of January before the 3rd anniversary of the Myanmar Spring Revolution. And then if they put their logo in the political statement with the signature of the respected organization, that will be very exclusive. They want to show it inclusive joint statement. That is why there is no logo, but only 3% as a contact person for the declaration. And regarding KIA, there is no contact person for the KIA. And then you may be aware that KIA participates not but as well as the TNLA, MNDAA, and then the AA. They are not formally aligned with NUG, but they are expressing, they are working closely with NUG. So if you look at the social media of these organizations, MNDAA, TNLA, they are presenting the joint visit with Myanmar NUG minister and their military leader. They are visiting around the military posts at the front line and then the investigation, this sort of thing. So that is another way of showing they are also working closely with NUG, the indirect way. So thank you so much. I think my answer is quite fit for that question.
Thank you, Dr. Tunang Shui. We have a question also asking what the incentive is for ethnic armed groups to get into negotiations. Could they not just go back to drugs, scams, and smuggling without a national law enforcement agency, making their lives difficult? I think John's question here is suggesting that there's in the period of the chaos that comes through the conflict, that criminal activities can flourish, and that some of the ethnic armed groups are engaged in that, and isn't that to their advantage? So essentially, what's in it for the ethnic armed groups by joining a democratic federal Myanmar?
If I could add something, I guess the fact that most of the ethnic armed groups have been fighting for exactly that, a federal democratic Myanmar. And I would think that they're not likely to prioritize that and the wishes of the people in the long term in order to protect those particular financial interests. Having said that, there are a number of groups that have access to all kinds of resources, whether it's associated with criminal activity or not, and have in practice an enormous amount of autonomy that would be probably compromised by a functioning federal democratic country. Let's just use the WA as an example. The WA have their own currency. They have their own military force. They basically are making their own decisions in how they run their particular area. If they become a state or an autonomous region or a number of local governments in a federal Myanmar, it is extremely likely that they would have much less autonomy and potentially much less resources than they have at the moment. So you might question why is it that they would want to join a federal democratic union? But these are the EROs that we are talking about, and the EROs are linked with political parties, and the political parties are also meant to be representing the public and the people want peace and federalism and democracy. And the design of democracy as a subsequent question, if I can sort of jump ahead, the design of federalism can incentivize people to join up because one, you get interdependency as well, so you can actually benefit from the other states and regions and the types of resources and human resources that they have. You also might get particular or specific rules accounting for, say, your natural resources. So you might get a specified share of the natural resources that come from your regions, particular taxes that you might be able to levy that not all states can levy. There are a range of ways that you can design federalism to make it more attractive to people. But it is true that there are groups who are going to have to give up some of their autonomy and some of their access to resources if they are part of a truly federal democratic union.
Thank you, Michael. If I could perhaps collapse a couple of questions into one. And it's asked, the statement speaks about, in the action plan, negotiations with the responsible leadership of the Myanmar military. Is there any evidence of responsible leadership in Myanmar military? And secondly, is there a timeline, an indicative timeline for the NUG? Dr. Tunang Shui?
Yes, thank you. So regarding the responsible business of the Myanmar military, I think Myanmar military have this kind of language in their life. So that is why we already witnesses thousands of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the international crime cases in Myanmar for in the 70 years now, over 70 years now, brutal conflict. But in these days, NUG and allies of ethnic organization, we have a priority program to support the peace building, to support the national reconciliation. That is called transitional justice. So NUCC already formulated a policy for transitional justice. And then NUG and EROs leaders, they are very committed to end the impunity that military receiving for enjoying for 70 years, over 70 years. So that is the thing, to bring the justice for people in Myanmar and also understand the impersonal for their responsible business attitude, behavior, and practice. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question, I think it was rather similar from Vicky Bowman, rather similar to last month's, Vicky, but I'll ask it again. And Vicky's asking, what specifically, in terms of language, natural resources, taxation, and so on, what sort of concessions or agreements would a future central government need to offer to the various ethnic groups to ensure or encourage them to stay part of a federal democratic union rather than to succeed? I mean, with the levels of autonomy that they will have, all areas in which they will have responsibility. It's a forward-looking question, but I think it's probably an important one as well.
Can I start with then Michael, please fill me up. So regarding this question, NUG is now trying to install the local administrative mechanism, and then taxation is part of the mechanism. And also the Ministry of Finance and Planning already initiated the early partnership program offering the international foreign investment for Myanmar. Not now, but early engagement with Ministry of Finance. And then when we win over the Myanmar military and able to bring the Myanmar Spring Revolution to the transitional phase, that program will be commenced, and then they start negotiate and implement the facilitate the foreign direct investment. And also within the NUCC and also the EROs and NUG leaders, we are also discussing about the federal fiscal policy, sharing our resources and managing the revenue, sharing the revenue. So these are another key issue on table, and then the leaders are discussing. Thank you. Michael, please fill me in.
Thanks. No, I think those points you make about investment and fiscal federalism arrangements are absolutely critical to designing a federal system. And one of the most important ways to create the interdependency that is needed to make people want to stay in the union, so secession does not become an issue at all. But I think Vicky has listed some of the things that are obviously important at a general level. So states and regions need to have language rights. They need to have more control and revenue over natural resources, taxation rights, health, and so on. But these are all things you might generally expect to see in any kind of federal system. So they're not necessarily going to incentivize greatly beyond what's already in place. One way might be in relation to international recognition. So, the international community might be more willing to support a federal Myanmar and recognize it as such. And so those that are seeking independence might not find that they might not actually get the international support. But the key thing I wanted to mention is that, as I understand it, there is increasing discussion towards or around the type of federalism that is actually might be better referred to as confederalism. And this is the kind of thing that the WA have wanted for quite some time. There's a new Chinland constitution, although the Chinland constitution is very much an interim constitution. It is very much confederal in its style. And I'm aware that there are state-based constitution-making processes underway that have these confederal elements. So confederalism is not really a kind of federalism. The only confederal place that exists today is basically the European Union, and that's not a single unified state. Confederalism has the sovereignty retained by member states. It has citizenship rights by the member states, and it does not have authority to legislate for individuals in those countries. It has to legislate through its members. The powers that the European Union has are explicitly delegated. It doesn't have any of its own powers. So these are some of the things that would incentivize states to be part of this union and not want to secede, but at the same time, it would bring into question the very unity of the country in the first place.
If I could give my take on this joint position statement. I mean, with its preconditions, which are fairly far-reaching, terminating the involvement of the armed forces in politics, for the army to come under the command of civilian government, abrogating the constitution, establishing a new federal democratic union, system of transitional justice. With those preconditions, which the military the responsible military leadership would have to accept unconditionally, it struck me more as the terms of an unconditional surrender rather than an offer to negotiate. Any response to that observation?
I would like to say that I read it as an attempt or an effort to sow greater dissent in the military and try and draw out a faction that is willing to overturn the existing unreasonable leadership. That's sort of my reading between the lines a bit, but Dr. Tunon Shrey has read the actual bits between the lines in those 15 pages. So I'm sure he knows more.
Yeah, so I would agree with Nicola's point that there is an unconditional offer to surrender the military leaders, especially the top-level SEC member. But this kind of the precondition also shake up the other military leaders at the regional level, divisional level. And then there is a choice for them whether they would like to stand together with people of Myanmar, and then they're getting the people love and respect for their life in the future, or whether they want to go together with the male line to end. So this is another kind of the psychological warfare document to shake up the Myanmar military, and then thinking to targeting the other military high-level rankers to think of the alternative. But I said before, NUG and EROs, we have learned a lot from the Myanmar military, their attitude, their behavior, their practice over 70 years. And then that is why everybody on the same page to eliminate the Myanmar military. So for example, Australian government spending over 350 million each and every year to countering the drugs war, over 80% of the methamphetamine coming from Myanmar, and then the government spending millions every year. And then the response is providing the training to the Myanmar police to targeting the drugs trade. But that is a downstream approach. The upstream approach is the peace, sustainable peace in Myanmar. And then sustainable peace, the NUG and EROs, their target is sustainable peace, real peace. So journalist Badil Lidla, in his study on the Myanmar peace building, he highlighted that Myanmar military attempted the peace building, but their focus is ceasefire, provide huge business opportunity to the arms group leader, and then the rehabilitation program for the followers. That's it. So that is negative peace, unsustainable peace. That is why Myanmar is in the over 70-year-long protracted conflicts. So that is why the NUG and EROs, they are very committed to eliminate the Myanmar military regime, but they welcome other military leaders who agree on the condition and then work together with the EROs and NUG and build the new Myanmar. Thank you.
I think I found that very interesting, Dr. Tunang Choi. Perhaps there's one bit I don't fully understand, or maybe you could explain it a little bit more to me. With one objective being the elimination of the Myanmar military, and the second being negotiations with responsible elements. But if the military is to be eliminated, what is there left to negotiate with? Or am I reading too much into it? Is it more, are you saying, eliminate the current attitudes and current leadership and some other, they may be members of the Myanmar military today, but we will negotiate with them if they're responsible and different from the ones. Can you disentangle that for me, please?
Thank you. So I would like to, very short answer is NUG and EROs, they apply conflict transformation approach, transform the Myanmar conflict to the peaceful society. So in this transformation, we're going to transform the military sector to the reform, police sector, administrative sector, business sector, including the responsible business is one of the agenda. So in previous time, and including the ASEAN approach, they are focusing on the conflict resolution school of thought. Stop the violence, sit down together, find a solution, peaceful solution, and then negotiated way of solution. But the 70 years experience already provided the answer to the NUG leaders and EROs. Conflict resolution approach doesn't work for Myanmar because of the Myanmar military attitude, their behavior, their practice, and their position.
Thank you. Michael, do you have any observations?
Not especially, except I would note that in the action plan, the order of A and B, the very first 2 points, continued political and military pressure, internal and external, against the military junta, then negotiations with responsible leadership of the military. So there's the attempt to, fracture and factionalize the military and then go down that path. And then ultimately it's the military junta and the military dictatorship and the military administration that is to be eliminated. So there is a sequence that is laid out that I think makes sense.
Thank you. We have a follow-up question, Dr. Tunang Shui, which when you said that some of the military may want to stay with the people, in what capacity? Can they be part of a federal army?
Yeah, so according to the People Embrace program, some of the military defectors, they express they want to join the federal army when it's come to serve for the country. But the umbrella principle is transitional justice. No one can be escaped if the person is committed international crimes or crimes against humanity, the person has to face absolutely with the tribunal under the transitional justice principle and practices. Apart from that, a person who is a former military personnel and then they join the de facto program and fight against the Myanmar military, and there is no records about the crimes committed, the person may be considered. So in Karenni states, so Karenni Interim Executive Council launched the de facto program, and then they assigned the well-known activist, former captain, to lead that program. So they are offering this kind of opportunity to the Myanmar military personnel to join the People Revolution. Thank you.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end of our time, but we have a further question, again relating to the military. Does the Myanmar military, and I'll call it that rather than its other name, the Myanmar military isn't all officers. What happens to the 100,000 private soldiers and their families when the Myanmar military is eliminated or disbanded?
Can I answer, or Michael, do you like to answer?
I think you should probably answer.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I
So
thought.
this is a very serious question and topic for NUG today, NUG as well as ERO leaders, because we already learned what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. So when the US and the allies, they win over the Iraqi government and the Saddam Hussein, and then they abolished the Iraqi military, the whole institution. And then now we have seen what happened in Iraq and as well as in Afghanistan. So NUG leaders and ERO leaders, they are now considering, and they don't want to do the reinventing the wheel. They going to learn from the past experience and then to find the best solution for the existing Myanmar military personnel at the total security sector reform program. But for the moment, it's very early to say. And also, my position is not at that level to understand all this discussion. So, but I do know this is a hot agenda within the NUG leaders and EROs. They already learned from the other country experience and mistakes, and they don't want to do the mistake again. And then also, there is a part of the total security sector reform program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I'd like to thank both of our speakers, Dr. Tung Shui and Dr. Michael Breen, for your contributions today. They've been very insightful. I think we've had a good, deep discussion on a very important topic. It leaves me now just to say that for our next webinar, which will be on Monday, the 29th of April, our speaker will be Scott Marcial, who is a former US ambassador to Myanmar and is currently has left the US Foreign Service and is now a professor in the United States, and has recently published a book on his career experience, including 2 of the chapters in the book dealing with Myanmar. So I'm not exactly sure what he will be choosing to speak about, but he has agreed to speak to us on the 29th of April. It'll be a little bit different in format, given the time difference. It'll be early hours of the morning, just after midnight his time. So we're going to do a pre-recorded conversation between him and myself, but we will be broadcasting that as a webinar on the 29th of April at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So until then, farewell, and I look forward to seeing you in a month's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.